polynomials, solving polynomial equations, we'll learn how to solve a cubic. When we have a polynomial and it equals 0, we can solve by factorizing and using the Null Factor Law. We've already learnt to do this for a quadratic, that is, the highest degree of x is 2. We want to be able to do this for a cubic. The highest degree of x is 3. We have x cubed. Excuse me. Our steps to factorize a polynomial. For a cubic or above, but let's just do cubics. Find one factor. Now we know how to check if something's a factor. We check if the remainder is 0. Sorry, my writing's getting a bit dodgy. So we find one factor, and basically you start by checking a couple of pretty obvious options. So that is, check x plus 1, x minus 1, and if we have to, check x plus 2 or x minus 2. If none of those go in, then we're starting to get into a little bit more complicated territory. So we're going to stick with checking for one of those, and we'll give you questions where generally these are our factors. Use long division once you've got this to find the quotient. Once you've found one of these that's a factor, divide it out with long division. I swapped colours. This should be pink. And so we find one factor, we use long division to find the quotient, and you'll have noticed that when we divide out a cubic by a linear equation, what we get is a quadratic. And we then factorize our quadratic, which is the quotient. And now you could, of course, do this for larger polynomials as well, but we'll stick with the cubic for the moment. So just a reminder about the Null Factor Law. This is a cubic, you can tell, because x cubed, x times x times x. And it's already been factorized. So if it was like this, the Null Factor Law is easy. If this equals 0, then either this factor equals 0 or that factor equals 0. All we've got is one more factor. X minus 1 equals 0, or x plus 2 equals 0, or 2x minus 3 equals 0. Solve each of those to find out the three possibilities for x. X equals 1, or x equals negative 2, or 2x equals 3, x equals 3 on 2. So that's a reminder about the Null Factor Law, that once we've factorized a polynomial, we use the Null Factor Law to find the values for x. Here, it would like us to solve a cubic. So our first step was to find a factor. Now I'll put my little instructions here in pink. Obviously you don't need to do all of that. So this is our polynomial. And we'll check x minus 1. So we're going to evaluate a is 1. Plus 2 times 1 squared minus 5 times 1 minus 6. 1 plus 2, minus 5, minus 6. And all you even need to do is just say, look, that does not equal 0. If we check x plus 1, so we're evaluating p as negative 1, negative 1 cubed, oops, plus 2 times negative 1 squared, minus 5 times negative 1, minus 6, and that equals 0. Therefore, x plus 1 is a factor. So we know x plus 1 is a factor. Then divide it out. Because once we've done that, we'll have quadratic that we can factorize. This means long division. Now, if you're feeling very confident about long division, you might want to skip down to where I've got the answer. If not, consider this some revision. X into x cubed goes x squared times. Multiply that out. That's x cubed plus x squared. Subtract. These cancel. 2x squared minus x squared is x squared. Bring down the rest. So, start again. So we're dividing the x into x squared. That goes in x times. Multiply that out. X times my divisor, x plus 1. Make sure it lines up with where I was. So that's x squared plus x. Subtract. X squared minus x squared. Negative 5x minus x minus 6x. Bring down this. Minus 6. Substitute, divide the x into here, that's minus 6. Minus 6 outside of x plus 1. Minus 6x, minus 6. And we expect to get 0 remainder, which we do, because if this was a factor, this is also going to be a factor, so we won't have a remainder. So I have my quotient. That means we can say that px is equal to x plus 1 times x squared plus x minus 6. Now, this part's factorized out. We can factorize this. Find your factors of negative 6 that add to give 1. That's going to be 3 and negative 2. That is x plus 1, x plus 3, x minus 2, because we factorized this out into these two terms. It's factorized. We need to solve. Solve means let the polynomial equal 0. So x plus 1 times x plus 3 times x minus 2 equals 0. X plus 1 is 0, or x plus 3 is 0, or x minus 2 is 0. That means x is 1, or x is negative 3, or x is 2. You've solved a polynomial. So your steps were: find a first factor by checking a couple of obvious factors until you get one. Divide the polynomial by the factor. Write it as x minus a times the quotient, and factorize the quotient. Then, if you're asked to solve, let that expression equal 0, and use your null factor law.